All right. So probably let me start by basically welcoming you all. So good morning, good afternoon, even good evening for Phil at the moment. It is my pleasure as well as honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, Professor Phillip Dawson. Professor Dawson is an internationally recognized leader in higher education research. He's been working in the field for the past 20 years. He's currently co-leading the Center for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning, CRADLE, at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. There, he leads critical work on two of the most pressing issues in education today: enhancing student engagement with feedback and assessing students in an era dominated by artificial intelligence. Professor Dawson brings a uniquely interdisciplinary perspective to the challenges we face currently. His current projects include designing assessment and empowering students through feedback literacy. So for us, these initiatives probably are not only academically rigorous, but they are, let's say, sort of much needed, and we need them in practice. Professor Dawson is also a prolific scholar. He ranks among the top 10 researchers worldwide in the field of higher education. He is mostly known for his research on feedback, cheating, and artificial intelligence in assessment. Again, Professor Dawson is a regular contributor to public debate on higher education. His work has been featured, and I'm going to list them all, on ABC TV, The Australian, The Age, Times Higher Education, the BBC, Vice, Vox, the Financial Times, the Geelong Advertiser, and discussed in the Australian Parliament. And if that weren't enough, he also brings creativity and humor into the academic space as a comedy performer. So please join me to warmly welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Phillip Dawson. Phil, the
Thank you
floor is
so
yours.
Thank you so much, Maya. It's a joy to be here with you and with colleagues from all around the world. I enjoy this part of the job so much. I know your time is really precious and you are all here voluntarily. We are all scholars, we are all teachers, we have very busy lives. So I appreciate that you're choosing to spend your time here together with us. Before I share my slides, I want to acknowledge I'm coming to you from unceded Indigenous land here in Australia, in Melbourne. It's the land of the Wurundjeri people, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging here. I am going to share some slides. Now, I'm talking about assessment design for a time of AI here today. I would love it if, as we go, you chuck things into the chat and we can kind of keep this. I got a skeleton of a presentation I want to talk to, but we can also keep a conversation going in the chat. There'll be time for questions at the end. It'll all be heaps of fun. I think a lot of the challenge around assessment that we've given teachers has been this, like this thing on the right here, how to draw an owl. You draw some circles and then you draw the rest of the owl, as if doing so was so simple. We're telling educators quite often that they need to respond to the challenges of AI by redesigning assessment or reimagining assessment or some other sort of radical shifts, but not really filling in what those might be. Now, today, I hope to go somewhere more detailed than the circles, but I'm not going to be able to draw the owl for you. You ultimately, in your own teaching, as I in mine, you have to draw your own owl. Your owl will be different to my owl. It will be beautiful. I can tell you some examples of some owls. They will not be the owl that you draw. But I hope we go somewhere more than this kind of just redesign assessment thing. Okay, before I get started, I have something really boring. Oh, there's love for the owl. Thank you, Maha. I have the boring slide, which is disclaimers. So firstly, I'm a standards-based assessment person. In the Australian context, we assess students compared to predetermined standards. We have to articulate what those are, and when we do grading, we determine how well a student has met certain standards. And we are only allowed to graduate students who have met all of the standards for their course. Those are the only people who can cross the graduation stage. It's against the law for us to not do that. And it's taken very seriously. We can lose our accreditation as a university. I understand that there are many different approaches to assessment out there. There are people who have to or choose to grade to a curve, for instance, which is against the law in Australia, grading to a curve or norm referencing, but we are a standards-based place. I support AFL, which is assessment for learning. Now, assessment for learning is this idea that the learning purpose of assessment is very important. Assessment should guide students through meaningful tasks. But in today's talk, I'm going to often focus on assessment of learning, which is the need to certify what students are capable of, what they have done, to be able to say, yes, this student has met the outcomes, they can cross that graduation stage. They're both important. They're not a contradiction. They can live together. But you'll see a focus in what I say on assessment of learning. Thirdly, I think there's many interesting things we could talk about with respect to AI. The one I'm going to focus on is assessment of learning and AI. But we could similarly have a great chat about how AI has problems with bias, how there are environmental problems, how it's extractive and taking knowledge and resources, copyrighted material, water from all sorts of places and peoples in ways that are not okay. That's not the conversation I'm going to focus on today, but they are worthwhile conversations. The fourth one there, I receive research funding for educational technology companies. I think it's really important when you hear keynote speakers go around to ask who funds you, who pays for your work. Most of my work is funded by my university. Um, a small amount of it's funded by research funders, and an even smaller amount has come from companies including Turnitin, Inspera, and a company that got acquired by Blackboard. Uh, I think it's really important that we have a conversation about money in this space. I am probably one of the most vocal critics of Turnitin's AI detection tools. I'm even on the record speaking to a parliamentary inquiry about how problematic those tools are. But I will acknowledge I've received funding from Turnitin in the past. And finally, my mum helped me contract cheat when I was in year 4. We had this task to do. We had to compare Australia and Canada and say the similarities and differences. My mum did most of it for me. I was terrible with these visual sort of postery type things that we had to do. And I now know it crossed a line. I raise this to say that our understandings of what's okay and what's not okay are deeply contextual. It was probably sort of all right that that happened there. It's probably not all right for a surgeon in training to pay someone else to do the surgery for them and get that person to complete the test. Deeply contextual, different situations of what's okay, what's not okay. And most importantly, we all make this up as we go. We are the ones that decide what's ethical, our whole community of international scholars. If you'd like a documentary about this, there's an episode of Peppa Pig, the British cartoon, where Madame Gazelle sets a challenge for all the students to make these dioramas, and they'll go home and get their parents to do it for them. And then they'll have a laugh about it. And it's all seen as quite okay and quite funny because in that context, it's actually quite okay to get someone else to do it. We have a great comment in here. I think contract cheating after the advent of AI is almost dead. It's really interesting. So the more hands-off contract cheating end of things, so companies that you can pay to do entire degrees for you, that is still certainly there and very much an active thing. I know this because I have colleagues who still receive death threats from these companies. The more sort of lower end of contract cheating, paying very small amounts of money to get a completed assignment, I think that end of the market is very much going to AI now. The sort of get the absolute bare pass for an essay or something. So I would agree with you there. It certainly has shrunk. I have a comment to make, and I'm going to preface it by saying the company Chegg that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange that at one point was worth many billions of dollars, is not necessarily a cheating company, though the Australian government is taking them to court about this. Um, their share price has plummeted to the point where they're looking at being delisted. And that would be a sort of an economic signal that if they were a cheating company, which I've said they're not, that you're probably right. It's almost dead. Okay, that was the most boring bit of the talk. That was the disclaimers. Now on to the fun stuff. Okay, I have 4 things that I'd love you to take from this. This is the things I'd like to convince you of through this talk. Firstly, that there's a need for assessment change for a time of AI. We need to do something. Secondly, how it needs to change, and that's going to really build on some work that we did for the Australian Higher Education Regulator. Thirdly, some key considerations to keep in mind as you do the work of assessment change. I'd like to think of these as some of the steps between the circles and the owl. And then finally, a really particular sort of change, the need for structural assessment changes. And if you're on the chunk of LinkedIn that I'm on, I recently posted about a paper we had published about 10 days ago about this sort of structural change to assessment thing. And that's seen sort of 100,000 views on LinkedIn, and it's now the second most read article from the past year in its journal. So this is hot off the presses, fresh stuff that I want to show you. Okay, let's start. Why does assessment need to change? I want to put something to you, which is this, that if AI can do your assessment to the pass level and your task matters for the assurance of learning, there might be a problem. So let's unpack that a bit. Firstly, if it could be done to the passing level, we often in conversation say, well, AI can do it, but not very well. But that's a problem as far as assurance of learning goes. Whatever the standard we accept, whatever the standard is that we would give someone a degree with, is the standard we need to agonize over and assure. I think often when talking about assessment, we get lost in what's an A versus a B, what's a 79 versus a 78, these real micro level things, and obsess about the sort of higher end of things. But really, when we say to the world, this graduate can be a historian, this graduate can build a bridge, this graduate can teach a class, we're making that judgment based on the passing level. Whatever level they can use for credit to a degree, we need to agonize over that. And if your task can be done by AI to that pass level, and it matters for assurance of learning, there might be a problem. The assurance of learning piece is that not all assessment really should matter as far as letting students get a degree. We probably overdo assessment. We probably do too much of it and pretend that all of it counts, when not all of it's actually really important and really important for us to decide you can get the degree now. So if your task can be done by AI, we have a problem. It's also now and into the future. So you might have had a look in the past a few years ago and seen that AI couldn't do it to your standard, but now it can, or maybe in a few months it can. Or you might have tried one prompt, do this task, and it couldn't do it, but you didn't go through an hour of back and forth and trying out to see if it can be done that way. We need to, when we're thinking about can AI do the task, do the best effort at it doing the task, not the worst effort. And in my experience, most of the time when someone thinks AI can't do the task, it can. And I say this based on a whole bunch of work that I'm doing with teachers at my university, where we get into in-depth interviews. We have a long-term relationship with this teacher where we are working with them to try and improve their assessment with them. And at the start, often people say, AI can't do the task. And it just often can. Maha says, yeah, people getting better at prompting AI to get it to do what they want it's important. And we can't judge AI based on the worst zero shot prompt. Okay. So this is me saying we have a problem. Now, there's often a view that sort of, well, AI can't do X, Y, Z. AI can't do critical thinking. It can't do this. It can't do that. Here's a little time capsule from 2021. So this is from that book there, A Brief History of AI. I'm not trying to criticize that book. I think for the time, really useful, really interesting. But they looked at what problems were completely solved through to nowhere near being solved in 2021. And we've got things like in the nowhere near solved, understanding a story and answering questions. We've got interpreting what's going on in a photograph. We've got a bunch of things that really are pretty close to being solved or are solved. Um, to me, this suggests that we can't make our decisions on assessment, which are so labor intensive. We can't make those decisions based on just a little snapshot in time, just like what could AI do right now? Because it can do more and more. We also want to think about what students are doing and what students think is okay to do, because ultimately what students think is okay is a pretty big shaper of what we should be doing. Our ability to shape them and tell them they're wrong and tell them their ethics are wrong and whatever is quite limited. I like this survey study of about 1,000 students. This is UK data, where they went and asked students, what are you doing in assessment versus what do you think is okay to do in assessment? And students are getting AI to explain concepts and they think that's okay. They're getting AI to summarize, to suggest research ideas, to structure thoughts. I think a lot of us would probably think that stuff is pretty okay. They're using AI in assessment after editing. So they're getting AI to do the thing and then they'll edit it, rewrite it, whatever. That's about a quarter of students doing it and thinking it's okay. About 1 in 5 think it's okay to use assessment after editing with AI. So you get AI, sorry, do things, get AI to edit the thing. About 8% are using AI in assessment without doing any editing at all. And some students are not engaged at all. We've got a comment in the chat. As faculty, we also have to think about using AI for marking assignments, making assignments, test exercises for our courses, outsourcing student assessment to AI for grading. Yeah. I'm not going to focus too much on that here today, but I agree with you that it's a conversation that we need to have. I think I'm probably really okay with people using AI to develop assessment now. I think that could be really fantastic, great labor saving thing. I think outsourcing the grading to AI is probably a bit more of an ethically complicated activity. Um, some examples are things like if you just upload student work to ChatGPT, you may not have their be able to sort of sign ChatGPT's terms of service on behalf of the student. Um, we don't always have the students' permission to put their work into all sorts of AI tools. So there's quite a complicated set of things there. There's also a long history of sort of things like automated essay scoring tools. Research on that goes back decades, where we find that often, even if AI or automated tools might come to the same grade as a teacher, it can sometimes come to the same grade for quite different reasons. Some of the work on automated essay scoring systems found that if you wrote something that was long and used big words, you would get a high mark. That's not necessarily what we want. So it's, Maha's here as well. Yeah, it's complex, tricky ethically. Not ruling it out, but I think there's work to do to establish that this is an okay thing. I do think students are using it a lot for formative feedback, though. And I think that's a really interesting space. There's a lot of research around that at the moment. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff. Students are doing a lot with AI. And then, there's some real great positive pro-learning uses of AI, but then we also have to acknowledge there's some really negative uses. So on the top right, we have a browser plugin that will just do online quizzes for you. It has no educative purpose. It purely exists to do quizzes. There's no defense of that in an educational environment, in my view. And if you currently award students grades for unsupervised multiple choice quizzes, I think that's something you need to stop. And I can say at my university, you're just not allowed to do that. Um, Now, note that I'm scoping this within assessment of learning. I think there are some great formative purposes. There's some great assessment for learning benefits of unsupervised multiple choice quizzes. They can be a great way to understand where you are at as a learner. They can also be a great way to understand where a cohort is at. I have used them to understand the numeracy of students in sort of numerical heavy courses. So I administer a mathematics diagnostic quiz at the start, which doesn't bear any grades at all, just so I can understand where my students are at and what I might need to teach on top of the content of my course. On the bottom left, we have OpenAI's operator tool, which is something that'll just run a web browser for you. You say, go online and buy me a pair of shoes, and it'll go online and buy you a pair of shoes. You say, here's the URL for my course, go in and complete the course. It will go in and complete the course for you. It will do the discussion board posts, it will do the assessed work, everything a student would do, it will just go on and do that. Not very well at the moment, and with a bit of supervision, it'll do it a bit better. But we need to acknowledge that this sort of thing exists. This is real, it's not science fiction. We have a comment here, even if students are okay with their work being uploaded, their grading could just be partially outsourced to AI, not completely. I think that's really interesting. We often find when we look at how people grade papers and do feedback, teachers often overemphasize low-level spelling and grammar and all of that stuff and don't spend enough time on the higher order things that students really need to learn. It'd be really interesting for that sort of lower level stuff to be offloaded to AI and have some of the higher level stuff, have teachers be able to focus more on that. And yeah, Jeff, we've got a comment on the bar chart in the previous one about the instinct to assume students actually used AI more than what they considered acceptable, but it was the inverse. The percentage using it was less than the percentage finding that use acceptable. Yeah, it's very interesting. There is in broadly sort of academic integrity research, there is a fair bit of social desirability bias where people like to say they do the right thing. And when some innovative methods are used, people often admit to doing a bit more than they think is okay. But, you know, I was also surprised along similar lines to you, Jeff, there. Okay, going to move on. I hope I've sort of articulated the nature of the problem that we have. We've got a problem of sort of the passing task being able to be done by AI. We have bespoke tools being developed to just do stuff for students. We have students believing a lot of things are okay that we may have different views on. And we have an AI world that's very rapidly developing. So what do we do? And Maha, there's been a conversation in the chat about sort of spelling, grammar, etc. AI could correct the grammar before they submit, unless you're teaching language and you want them not to use AI for that. Yeah, and that's a really interesting one. I think where it is authentic professional practice to use these tools, we need a very strong justification if we want to stop students from using these tools. You know, spelling and grammar in Microsoft Word means we don't mark as many papers that have those sort of low-level spelling and grammar mistakes as we used to. And I'm quite okay with that because it's authentic professional practice to not use those, to use those tools and not make those mistakes. Okay, now I'm going to talk about how assessment needs to change. And we were given this task by the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency. So this is the Australian higher education regulator. We assembled a group of 18 experts across assessment, higher education, and AI. We looked for quite divergent people, people we thought would argue a lot with each other. And we got together for a couple of days and wrote something that we would probably call a 75% consensus statement. It was too hard to reach an actual consensus, but this was something we were happy to put forward as a group to the world. And this has become a document that the Australian higher education sector has had to respond to. So universities have had to say how they're doing this stuff. I'd love it if someone can share that in the chat, or you can just Google the document or whatever. Okay. As a group, we came up with 2 guiding principles on how assessment needs to change for a time of AI. The first one is that assessment and learning experiences equip students to participate ethically and actively in a society where AI is ubiquitous. So this is very much an assessment for learning principle. This is talking about assessment needs to equip people for this world. But we've got a few sort of interesting words there. We've got participating ethically. We don't want to graduate people who are just all gung-ho on AI for everything forever. And we want them to be active, not passive in this, in a society where AI is ubiquitous. Ubiquitous is not a value judgment to say that AI is necessarily a good thing. Ubiquitous is just saying it is there. We previously, in a previous version, said where AI, society pervaded by AI, and that was viewed as too negative by some. So we made it a bit more neutral. But there's no endorsement of AI in the world. There's more of an acceptance of it being there. Our second guiding principle is that forming trustworthy judgments about student learning in a time of AI requires multiple, inclusive, and contextualized approaches to assessment. This is very much an assessment of learning principle. So this is saying we need to make decisions about what people are capable of. And to do that, we need multiple moments of judgment. There's no single moment where you can actually say this person is capable of this. You need multiple moments. And they should be inclusive. All assessment tasks exclude in different ways. They all differentially advantage and disadvantage different people, and we need to think critically about that. I have written about remote proctored exams, for instance, and inclusion. So these are exams that monitor you through a webcam, check you're not using the wrong programs on your computer while you do an online test, all of that. They have some pro-inclusion and some anti-inclusion aspects. They are anti-inclusion because, you know, if you have trait test anxiety, you tend to score worse than someone without it. If you have a non-neurotypical gaze pattern, if you're looking all over the place while you're thinking, you might be flagged as having done the wrong thing. If you have a darker skin tone, you might not even be picked up as a person by some of the tools. So there's anti-inclusion aspects there, and there's some pro-inclusion aspects. I've done a lot of interviews with students who have viewed these as the only way they've been able to engage with education because it was not feasible for them to find childcare to go and do an exam in an exam hall. So inclusion's a complex thing here. And contextualized approaches to assessment. That assessment needs to fit the context. There is no universal approach to assessment. I can tell you things I've done, and you may say those won't work in my context. We need to find things that work in the context. Yeah, and there's also a mention of AI accessibility tools there as well. Even some of the first AI tools that came through. I remember a thing called Goblin tools that came through at the start of the sort of generative AI boom, which was a set of tools for neurodivergent people that supported executive function and was very much embraced by the neurodivergent community. AI can be a really positive thing for inclusion as well. Okay. Those are our guiding principles. And I want to flag that we hold them in tension with each other. We hold them both together at the same time. It's not either or. Okay. Now, these are a bit higher level. They're more fleshed out than 2 circles, but they're definitely not an owl. So we go down 1 level to these 5 propositions. They are that assessment should emphasize, firstly, assessment should emphasize appropriate, authentic engagement with AI. Now, this is to say we want to look at what happens in the field of actual practice of the discipline, out there in the practice of accounting, out there in the practice of medicine, out there in the practice of the arts, and say, how is AI being used there? And do we want to represent that within our assessment? We don't always want to do it. Not everything that's authentic is a good thing to represent within assessment. If it was, I would set a lot of assessment tasks that were answering emails all day, because that's what I feel like I do on a lot of days. That's my authentic work life. That's not a worthwhile thing to assess. But we want to do it where it's appropriate, where it's educationally useful. Assessment should emphasise a systemic approach to program assessment aligned with disciplines and qualifications. This is to say, stop focusing on the individual assessment task and trying to make a perfect task. Zoom out to the level of the degree program. Students leave us with a degree. That degree as a whole needs to mean something. We can't just zoom in on the individual task. We need to think about how it fits together. And the use of AI needs to be scaffolded and structured in a meaningful way across a program. Maha says, I actually give my students who come from different disciplines an assignment to find out how AI is currently being used in their profession by interviewing a professional and an academic and asking AI tool too. I really like that, Maha. I think that's such a great way for them to understand, and also for us to learn from our students how AI is being used in their disciplines. We have a program at my university called Future Focused AI Fellowships. I think that's what it's called, where academics actually go out into industry and spend some time with industry to understand how AI is being used in their field. But we haven't done that with students. I think what you have is a really interesting idea. The third of these propositions is that assessment should emphasise the process of learning. We overemphasise product. We mostly assess a thing people give to us. The integrity of those things is really limited. When someone submits an essay to us, we have very little idea of how that was produced, if it was really them, and what learning benefit there was to doing this. In this proposition, we're saying we want to also assess process. We want to understand how people got there. One of the ways that this is often done in Australia is through assignment writing platforms. One of those is a tool called Cadmus. There are many others. These are tools where students write their assignments in an online platform, and the teacher can play back. And if you want to sit down with the student, have a conversation about it. I also, when I've taught computer science, I sit down with students and have check-ins with them about how they're going on their projects, try to really understand how are they learning this. We know with my other hat on as a feedback researcher, we know that feedback that's about the process of learning, about self-regulation, is so much more effective than feedback on product. So this is where, from an assessment for learning perspective, we really want to be focusing our attention on the work in progress, on the process. Fourthly, assessment should emphasise opportunities for students to work appropriately with each other and AI. We're not saying get rid of AI, but we're also not saying get rid of working with other people. We want students who work with other people still. And finally, assessment should emphasise security at meaningful points across a program to inform decisions about progression and completion. I think we probably need somewhere in the order of about half a dozen moments in a degree program where we are sure the student is who they say they are, and we are sure that they have done the work in the conditions that we think matter. Our ways of doing that can vary, but I think we need about half a dozen of them. We definitely don't need 50 of them. That's completely overdoing it. If you have an exam at the end of every single course, you are overdoing it. We don't need to assure that much. But if you have no exams, if you have entirely take-home tasks, I don't think you can hand on heart say you are assuring learning. Some people will say, I trust my students, that distrust is what creates this problem. While that's been claimed a lot of times. I've really delved into the literature to try and find support for it, and I just can't find any evidence in support of that. We do need some moments where we're sure people are who they say they are and they're doing the thing themselves. We've got a comment here. Shouldn't we assess also how much they learn not to rely too much on AI instead of just how to use AI? Won't they say, why work with other people when AI can give me more accurate results and less headaches? Then Maha saying, wouldn't they realize this is not true when they work with others? We value stuff other than product and answers. I think this is all really interesting. It speaks to how localized a lot of this is to individual degrees. I can tell you that, if I go to my home discipline of computer science, I know that programmers these days are sitting there with AI open, using AI to do everything. But I also know that if you don't have the judgment about when AI is giving you good results, that you have really big problems. You probably will struggle to get a job if you're a not AI using software developer these days. But if you're someone who can't develop software at all on your own, you will similarly struggle to get a job and do some terrible work. We've got a comment here, University of Sydney, Danny Liu has an interesting approach using lanes that make this distinction. Assessment for learning and assessment of learning that we can rely on for ensuring that students are in your care. I very much agree with Danny's approach here. I like his lane one, lane two thing, really encourage people to look at it. And if someone could put a link to it in the chat, that'd be great. I think it's about when we deploy those. And I really want to challenge you. If you are in a degree program where there is a secure assessment in every course, you're overdoing it. It makes life worse for people. It's not educationally meaningful. But if you're in a program where there's no secure moments, you have a real problem. Thanks for putting the links there in the chat. Okay, so this is what we came up with. I have a few reflections on this. So what was in the previous slides was a bit of a consensus statement. These are my personal views. Firstly, we don't mention cheating, but I think it's not a worthwhile framing. I've really walked away from being a scholar of cheating in recent years. It's certainly where I started in all of this. I started researching cheating because I was in an exam vendor's presentation who said their tool was cheating proof. And I thought, that's ridiculous. Nothing's cheating proof. And I tried and I was able to cheat in it. And then I just thought, this cheating thing's pretty interesting. I have found, though, that with AI, it's so ethically different. AI use in our disciplines is so real and authentic in ways that contract cheating or exam cheating or something like that just isn't. It feels like a totally separate thing. I don't think it's a useful framing. The second point is we don't mention validity, but it really underpins the whole thing. So when I say validity, I mean a really simple thing of, are we assessing what we mean to assess? So we need to ensure that our assessments do what they're supposed to do. They assess the thing they're trying to assess. AI can get in the way of that. If someone uses AI in ways that we didn't build the task to do, it's harder for us to make a judgment about what they're capable of. Now, I'm able to make that sentence without saying the word cheating at all, without even necessarily saying inappropriate AI use. It's just about, we built the task to do this, and you've done this other thing, and we can't determine what you're capable of from that. Thirdly, we can't substitute all of our assessments of disciplinary outcomes with assessment of AI use or critique. So I've seen a lot of people saying, we used to set this task, now AI can do it. So we're getting students to use AI to do it, and then they critique the output of AI. The problem with that is that it's quite a different thing that we're assessing and teaching there. It's great. I'm all for developing what we call evaluative judgment, the ability to make decisions about the quality of your own work, other people's work, AI outputs. I think that's a great outcome, but it can't be the only thing that we teach and assess. Um, we've got here the comment, maybe I understood well the we don't mention cheating. If I recall well, we have a half-page section plus student code of conduct section about cheating. Yeah, it's interesting. Look, if you're interested in my views on the word cheating, I co-edited a special issue of the journal Assessment and Evaluation in Higher Education called Challenging Cheating. In that, we set all of the authors the task of basically the concept of cheating isn't serving us well. If you were to get rid of it and reinvent things, what would you do differently? And you'll see in that a whole bunch of different takes on it. And I'll talk about the article that I led in that very shortly. Okay, so that's how we think assessment should change. I now have some ideas that I would like you to keep in mind. I hope at least one of these that I'm going to go through is a worthwhile thing for you to do in your assessment. So really focus on these and think, which one might I use? And I'll do a little bit of voting in the chat once I've covered them. Okay, the first one is that we're often not even having a conversation about assessment. I really like this comment. It's Liz McDowell citing Dylan William. Many of the dilemmas we face are not about assessment per se, but are at heart debates about what should be assessed. We need to have this conversation as well. We need to say, is it still appropriate for us to assess these things in a time when AI can do them? We had the comment in the chat about how we often assess spelling and grammar, but AI can do a lot of that now. So maybe we just let students do that with AI and we assess the other stuff, the stuff that really matters. We need to have this conversation here. Are we still assessing the right things? This is not an assessment conversation. This is a curriculum conversation, but they both really matter. We have comment in the chat with use of Gen AI tools. How does plagiarism apply? If I use Perplexity for my research work and I submit it as a thesis, but it was flagged as plagiarized, how does that serve in an ethical point of view? I think it's really interesting because you're covering two domains there. You're covering the teaching and learning domain and the research domain there in the form of a thesis. As far as the teaching and learning domain, I don't think plagiarism is a worthwhile framing for AI use that we don't want people to do. I think an assessment validity view of, are we able to judge what you're capable of? And with what you've given us, if we've said, please don't use AI, we want to see what you can do, and then you use AI, we need to be able to say, we can't credit you for this because we haven't seen that you can do this thing. Now, I make no moral judgment there. I'm accusing no one of cheating. I'm just making a very straightforward claim about assessment. I'm saying, if you use AI when I've told you to not use AI, I can't credit you for being able to do something. From a research perspective, I'm actually of the view that I'm very okay with AI being used in research writing as long as the authors completely take responsibility for what's written. If there's any inaccuracy, if there's any fabrication or anything like that, that is research misconduct by the authors. Even if AI produced it and the authors were not aware that it's a mistake, that's misconduct. So I think in the context of professional practice, which I'd put research into, I think it's about owning the output, taking ownership of it. We have another comment. Would including a formula involving AI detector percentage outputs within the assessments help? I'm not convinced that AI detectors are something that has what we call high probative value. So high probative value is, if this were held up in a committee process where someone had to prove that AI was used, that a committee of expert people in this area would agree that AI had been used based on the AI detector output. And because it doesn't have that high probative value, because it's not able to be used to prove something, I don't think it's a good idea for us to use it in assessment. I'm not saying AI detectors don't work. I'm just saying they can't be trusted to that level that we need them to be. We have a comment. Hasn't anyone ever had their typing watched by managers, bosses, etc.? I've had pens and paper writing tests to get jobs, been asked to type things as a group. Spelling and grammar probably still matters. And I think this will vary across fields. You, as someone in your discipline, are part of the conversation for your field about what matters, what counts, what's important. And there's often a lot of things that count that, don't end up being explicit items of assessment, but we all know are really important things. We have a comment planning on cancelling our institutional Turnitin subscription. It's not catching our generated text correctly, and I think spending so much money on proctoring is not reasonable. Better really emphasize on training students to think and work as researchers. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting conversation for you to have. What I would say is you need to ensure you have some high security moments of assessment somewhere. And AI detector's probably not going to do that for you, which then leads to the question of, well, what is it for? If it doesn't actually assure the learning, what do we have this thing for? What does it do for us? Some people say they serve an educative purpose. That, can be argued. Yeah. Yeah, there's a comment there about them giving a false sense of security, and I would really agree with you about that. Okay, I'm going to crack on because I'm aware I could jump into the chat all day. Okay, you heard me say a quick mention of that special issue, and this is the key paper that we have in there, which is that validity matters more than cheating. So assessment validity being, are we assessing what we mean to assess? We have a task. We think this task assesses this outcome or these set of outcomes or these capabilities or whatever else. The degree to which the task assesses those outcomes, that's validity. Now, if there are any validity nerds here, check out the paper. We go into a more sophisticated way. You can look into different types of validity and have fun. But for our purposes, we all need to be okay about using the word validity in casual academic conversation. We need to be able to talk to each other. If you assess, validity is your word. You own it. We want to be using this. Validity is seen as a God term, something that all other language should be subservient to, all other concepts should be. It's very powerful. We need to own it as a powerful term. Now, in this article here, we argue that validity is really important. And cheating, if you boil off all the morality, cheating only really matters because it gets in the way of our ability to make judgments about what students are capable of. If you cheat on the task, I can't judge what you're capable of. We have a validity problem. Validity problems, really, a lot of them exist at a sort of systems level, at a task level. They're not pinned onto the individual person. We have a problem with the task. If you can use AI to do the task rather than do it yourself, that's a validity problem. However, if we lock down all of our assessment so that it's more valid and AI proof or whatever, but in the process, we adopt approaches that are not inclusive, well, inclusion or exclusion really presents its own validity problems, because when a task doesn't work well for certain groups of students, let's say, in my context, English as a second language students are often disadvantaged by a lot of tasks. Even though they're capable of the outcome we're supposed to assess, they're less capable of doing the task because we've overly relied on language when language shouldn't really be that important for the task. Then we have an exclusion problem that creates a validity problem. So we're always balancing, do I set an interactive oral assessment where I have a conversation with a student about their work to improve validity because I can be sure they're not using AI in the conversation, probably. If I do that, I need to be aware of the literature that interactive oral assessment, in a lot of contexts, really assesses masculine sort of traits. Women tend to score lower in interactive oral assessment tasks, despite having met the outcomes equally well. So we then introduce a validity problem there to try and solve another validity problem. It's a complex, wicked problem. But I'd love it if you focus on validity not on cheating, not on inappropriate AI. How well does my task assess the thing I'm trying to assess? We have a comment here with assessment. I totally agree with you. In some countries, students don't take final exams but are assessed differently. And I really commend that. At the end of the day, students get too distracted with competition and not really learning. I agree with you. If you would like a very historical take on sort of competition and assessment, a colleague of mine, Robert Nelson, and I wrote a piece tracking sort of the history of competition in assessment. And assessment as a competitive act is not inherent to assessment. Assessment doesn't need to be competitive. And there's a long history of it not necessarily being that way. Okay, so that's the validity plea. I think we've talked this one through a little bit, the idea of assessment representing real world use of AI. I just want to flag a little bit here that we want to be forward thinking with that as well. We want to think about future authentic assessment. What assessment might be, what AI use might be in the student's likely future. It's also worthwhile thinking here that perhaps the future of AI is not soaring forever upward to some wonderful magical place. It could go backwards. It could get locked behind paywalls in ways that it's not currently, and really disadvantage some people. We may, and some people here will probably think are quite likely to go into a climate catastrophe where our ability to do such energy intensive things might diminish. We need to think about the future when we're deciding how to use AI in our tasks. As educators, a lot of us are familiar with the concept of scaffolding, that you allow students to use certain supports that you gradually withdraw once they're capable of doing more and more. I think this is probably a bad idea with AI. I think we want to do the reverse. We want to try a reverse scaffolding approach with AI where we can, and say, there are these things I need to see you do before you can get AI to do them. We need to know you have developed that capability. I'm aware there are critiques of the calculator analogy, but it's relevant here. When I was a child, my teacher said you won't have a calculator with you in your pocket every day, and now I do. But it's still helpful that I developed that automaticity with my times tables, all of that sort of stuff. If you want to see a critique of the calculator analogy, I co-authored a paper with Jason Lodge. I think the title is "It's Not Like a Calculator." But I think to get slightly more theoretical on this, people may be familiar with the concept of zone of proximal development, which is that gap between what you're capable of on your own and what you're capable with the assistance of more capable others. And the gap between them is the zone of proximal development. It's the stuff you can do with help. AI is not designed to help you traverse that zone. It's not designed to help you gain the capability to do it yourself. AI tools for production, not like learning tools, but things like ChatGPT, are designed to hook you in and get you continuing to use them. So we need to think about this with our assessment, that we're not integrating tools that will breed dependence. Cognitive offloading is any time you use a physical action to reduce the mental burden of a task. The first person to complain about this is really Socrates, who complains that with the advent of writing, we will see people who appear to know things, but really they don't, because they just read it or they wrote it down. And over successive generations, we've had panics about all sorts of different tools being used in that way for cognitive offloading. I think it's useful to distinguish between two types of cognitive offloading. And here I take from the cognitive load theory literature. You could think of intrinsic cognitive load and extraneous cognitive load. So intrinsic cognitive load is the mental work that's required to do the task. Doing the task is this stuff. You can't get rid of it. Extraneous cognitive load is all the busy work, all the add-on stuff that we often still assess, but has no educational value. And I'd go back to sort of Maha's comment in the chat about the spelling and grammar stuff. In some contexts, spelling and grammar is extraneous cognitive load that we should not assess. Um, I will say that referencing, I use EndNote. I engage in cognitive offloading by using EndNote because that is extraneous to the task I'm doing, to the tasks I set students. We need to look at our tasks and really try and draw a line between those things that are essential to what we're assessing and those things that are really superfluous, extraneous, busy work. Okay, the last one of these concepts for now is evaluative judgment. I mentioned this briefly before. It's making decisions about the quality of your own work, about the work of others. Um, in a time of AI, this really matters. And we in that paper discuss some particular ways that it matters. I'm just going to talk about that first, where they're judgments about AI products. Our students need to know if AI is giving them poor quality work. When they graduate, they need to be able to make judgments about if AI works good enough to use, to give to their boss, to use with the patient, to inform their practice. This is something we need to explicitly teach. The Dunning-Kruger studies, the work that shows that if you're not that good at something, you might think you're really good at it. Those studies demonstrate that students need to do things to get good at judging the quality of those things. And that's one of the reasons why we still need to get students to do things that they might otherwise offload to AI. They might say to us, I will never use this again. But to be able to judge it, they need to be able to do it. So this really matters. Okay. I have these 7 concepts here that I really should have numbered because I would love now if you can chuck into the chat which one of these you think is the most useful one for your context. Which one of these? So just like a 1 to 7 number, which one? It's hard to commit to one, isn't it? We have a 1. Okay, what's assessed? Yeah, 6 and 7. Yeah, yeah. A 2. Yeah, 7. 2 more than 1. Okay, this is great. My favorite in there is probably 2. I think we really need to get that validity argument out to the world, but I'm also really partial to the evaluative judgment one because I think, and Rose Luckin and Margaret Bierman argue this elsewhere, that the ability to judge quality is probably going to be one of those capabilities we retain as humans. It's really important we keep ownership over deciding what is good enough. Okay, I'm going to really briefly go through one last thing, and then I'm going to hand over for some more chats. It is this basic thing. I want to say the solution to all of this in our assessment of learning context, where it really matters in those half a dozen moments where we're trying to set tasks we can make high stakes judgments on, don't just tell students what to do. Got a couple of papers here led by Thomas Corbin. He's a research fellow in my group, where we've really been looking at how do we set boundaries around AI use in assessment. The one in the bottom left there has Danny Liu in there as well, and very much is compatible with his lane 1, lane 2 approach we discussed earlier. In that one in the bottom left, we argue that there's 2 types of changes you could make to assessment in response. So you go to my talk and you think, I'm going to change my assessment. There are 2 types you might make. The first is discursive changes. These are addressing AI in assessment through giving instructions to students, saying to them, you can use AI for editing, but not for writing. This sounds like a good idea. And I think guidance for what students should do, that's our role as educators. We do it. We love it. It's important. It has very little utility in shaping what students do in a higher stakes assessment of learning context. We can't rely on a set of traffic lights that says this is a red light task, you can't use AI. This is a yellow light task, you can use AI for this but not for that. We can't rely on that. We need what are called structural changes. Addressing AI in assessment through changes in the task that are unavoidable. Things like, we're going to get you to do the task out of class, and then We're going to sit down with you and mark the task in class and have a conversation with you. This is what I do when I mark computer science tasks. I will sit with you, next to you. We will have a chat about your work and I'll say, oh, why'd you make that decision? What does this line do? Was there another way of doing that? And we'll have this dialogue with each other where I'm both helping you learn and understand the work, but I'm also verifying that you did the work, you understand this. I can sign off that you can do the thing. In the paper, we basically say if there's not that discursive change, if there's no supervision or synchronous work or some other way that you're confident it's really the student, you can't be sure how AI was or wasn't used. So my plea to you is don't set restrictions that you can't enforce. Just don't. Just accept that they're not a worthwhile thing to do. Don't tell people not to use AI because it doesn't work. It just hurts validity. Secure some tasks, half a dozen things, and accept the others will see a lot of AI use. And we can't really change that. I know we want to think we can. I know we think trust will win in the end and all of that. It just won't. And I encourage you to have a look at the paper for the long form argument of why. Finally, I've focused a lot on the level of individual tasks. We want to remember we zoom out, we think about a Swiss cheese approach here. Okay. There's no perfect assessment task that's going to be like AI proof or the best thing ever. We want to layer many different types of assessment approaches that are each imperfect, like layers of Swiss cheese. And hopefully together they'll do a better job than saying, we are now going to have 6 high stakes face-to-face exams, because that is not a secure approach, but it's also not a fair, balanced, valid, educationally meaningful approach. Lots of different imperfect approaches layered together like layers of Swiss cheese. Okay, I'm aware I have talked a lot. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to leave this little summary slide here and have a bit of a conversation. Over to you, Maya.
So Phil, I guess Maha left, and I believe Huda had something about co-assessment and the oral validation and talking through is very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also really nice. So sometimes when people say, when I talk about oral assessment in this way, people say it's not feasible. I couldn't do it. I have too many students and all of that. And I think if that's our answer across a whole degree, to say at no point can we have a conversation with you about your work, it feels so sad. I think we owe it to students to talk with them about their work, to have these scholarly feedback dialogues with them. I think it can be a beautiful thing. And yeah, your phrasing there of sort of co-assessment of they have the out of task part, out of class part, and the in class part where we talk with them. It is really powerful. I think as well, it lets us manage the workload of it. So there can be the out of class part, but we keep the marking grading time to this contained part that we do within class so that it doesn't take up all of our weekends and evenings and all of that.
I guess Noor had something to add, and I loved Khalid's question on the role of the librarian in here.
Yeah, okay. I'll do the in the order that they're here. So um, I am not aware of a really good crowdsourced sort of document of examples. I think it's a worthwhile thing to create and talk. I've done a lot of work on assessment change over the years and what people say seems to help them. The most influential thing seems to be the person in the office next door, and then the head of department and close colleagues and all of that. So I think if an outcome of this is that you talk to people within your discipline, close colleagues, and actually have a conversation where you share what you do, I think that can be really powerful. Um, I think it is good to also share some stuff online, but I think it's in the conversations that we have about it rather than just a disembodied exemplar. onto the question about the library. I think librarians have some really interesting roles to play. I think, firstly, I talked about that evaluative judgment, that sort of capability of making decisions about the quality of work. And I really think librarians are experts in that. You know, you have a long history of helping people judge sources. And I think there's a role, sort of a pedagogical role for librarians there to work in partnership with faculty. Um, I think it probably is in that sort of partnership role, because I know some librarians are feeling that a lot of students are leaving the the sort of library spaces and the library resources and prioritizing AI. I think we want librarians and faculty to be working to embed those sort of capabilities in, to get librarians in the classroom, have those conversations. Oh, fantastic. And there's gathered resources there. Please, please do check that out. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen because I'm aware that it's taking all of it.
So does anyone have any question that is not answered, or any concerns, any challenge, any, I mean, narrative they want to share, or good story about assessment and they're looking for feedback?
Oh, great. There's one in here. What assessment approaches would you suggest for non-native speakers of the English language, especially when formal quizzes, such as quizzes and exam, formal assessments, quizzes and exams are the norm? Yeah, yeah. I think firstly, I'd be trying to identify the extent to which proficiency with the English language is part of the intrinsic thing that's being assessed versus just a just a way that we might be able to understand what someone could do. So, really trying to have those conversations about what is the core outcome we're looking at, and to what extent is English language proficiency the thing we're trying to work with. We know there's a lot of students writing things in their first language and then using automated translation tools to translate it into another language. We need to have conversations about how much that matters. It will matter a lot in some contexts. In my country, we have a lot of rules about English language being the language of instruction. Things can only be assessed in that. So it's a problem if someone uses another language for that. But yeah, I think it's very hard. I think also we need to look at the ways that we frame our tasks. And yeah, there are some great things where you can get automated evaluations of the reading level of your task instructions. So you can go to AI and say, check out the reading level of this. And if the reading level of the instructions we are giving to people is very high, then that's a problem for the validity of our task. So it shouldn't be any harder to understand our task instructions than it absolutely needs to be. There's no educational value to that.
Any other question on assessment and language, or assessment and computer science? So Abu Bakr had something. Well,
Yeah, yeah. Also find it interesting, your position on the use of AI has been fine-tuned because of your background, IT, computer science. Sometimes people get scared of what they don't understand. Yeah. So a little about me. I initially did undergraduate and then started a PhD in AI. And yeah, I moved to education because I just really I liked teaching a lot, and I found that that was the more interesting domain for me. But yeah, I think there are some things that are a little enduring in AI that have been useful for me to understand some of these things. I think we don't all have to become AI experts. experts in AI in general, but I think it is really important that we as educators come to understand how everyday AI used is how everyday AI works in our particular fields. So, certainly I love AI and it's a passion of mine and I use it a lot, but I try to keep abreast of my current discipline of education and what the sort of everyday AI uses are. There's a comment in there. I was wondering how assessments are done in teaching of regional/local languages, for example, Arabic or in our context, Urdu language. Honestly, I don't know. I can say in Australia, we have many, many Indigenous languages that are sadly disappearing, and there is some work being done to sort of preserve them, and some of that's using AI. But I don't have any sort of specialist knowledge on language teaching in AI. I'd be interested if anyone else attending does. While you think about that one, there's a comment here. Been thinking about institutional accreditation and how AI and assessment will now impact all the things institutions are asked to demonstrate for accreditation. I'm not sure how to form a question out of that, but this has all been wonderful and thought provoking. Yeah. So this morning, the Australian higher education regulator said that they are moving from a guidance approach to a regulation approach when it comes to AI and assessment. So they're moving from trying to guide the sector into insisting and checking and auditing that AI and assessment is done well, that the assurance of learning is done well. This really varies across contexts. So I can say in some contexts like Northern America has very weak regulation of higher education in general, and there's very little regulation around these sort of concepts. Whereas if you look at um, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Ireland, a lot of other parts of the Anglosphere, which I have to admit is where I'm most familiar, those contexts have much firmer regulation around these. I think in the long term, it will be when there are very significant uh, crises or scandals that we see big problems. And in Australia, we care so much about this because we've had some very serious problems with it. Probably the worst of these in our region was during the Christchurch earthquake. One of the big towers that collapsed was built by someone with a fraudulent degree from an Australian university, and a lot of people died in that. And it's events like that that really made us say, no, we need to take the assurance of learning very seriously.
Mhm. Uh, Basically, Phil, one of the attendees is asking, would it be okay for him to connect with you via LinkedIn?
Oh yes, yes. I will admit that I connect with pretty much everyone on LinkedIn. So jump on there, add me, and send me messages. And yeah, I love to talk about this stuff.
And if he had a question, if possible.
Yeah. So that one is general questions. Love your view. What are your thoughts on AI regulation? Also, what is your view about where we are with copyright and AI? What's the future of copyright? So AI regulation, I think, is really difficult because regulation tends to be done at a country level, and a lot of this AI exists in countries that are not the country that we live in. There is also the challenge of open source AI. So you can go and download a lot of AI models and remove the guardrails yourself and do whatever you want with them and do some really troubling things with them. And it's not really that feasible to regulate open source AI. So I think regulation is important, but I don't think it will be our solution, particularly in the education context. Um, yeah, I very much am afraid that unlike some other technology things that we are more able to regulate, this is one that we probably won't be able to. Now, as far as copyright and I think that's probably something we're going to be more able to do. Um, I you can see some big publishers now making successful legal claims, getting royalties out of big AI companies and all of that. So I do think we're likely to see some wins there, but I think the majority of sort of AI use of copyrighted material is not going to be compensated, and that's not good.
I guess there are some questions, but we're running short of time. But we can still stay, by the way, Phil.
Yeah,
But for
yeah.
those of you who wish to leave, because I know that like almost like less than 2 hours from now, we have, let's say, our presentations on library innovation and services. So for those of you who wish to leave, thank you for attending and thank you for your valuable input. For whoever is decided to stay, and probably Phil agreed to take those questions, right, Phil?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So please, we still have one from Huda, another from Noor. And yeah, for the rest of you, I guess like we really enjoyed it today. But again, like maybe they need to leave.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it. I'm happy to stay on and chat, but also recognize you've got to go. So I'll do this first one on negligence and malpractice.
Yeah.
What is an MD? See no reason why we cannot be more open about regulation as long as we could collaborate, be collaborative, inclusive. It's a challenge, but no regulation is scary. Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting. Um, I think within some contexts like medicine, there's probably more ability to regulate there. I think more in terms of AI in general, we can legislate about deep fakes, and we should, and there's been some terrible things that have been done with deep fakes, but I think we shouldn't believe that regulation will solve the problem of deep fakes. I think it will probably do very little to address the problem, but it's still an important approach to take. I can say in the investigating the effectiveness of legislation field, some countries have laws against the provision of cheating services to students. And I've done a little bit of work on how effective those laws are. In one study, we found that there wasn't a correlation between whether a country had made it illegal for students to use these cheating services and whether students believed it was illegal to use the cheating services. And in another study, we found that the majority of cheating services were located in countries where it was illegal to provide those services. So it, I am just not sure how effective it'll be. I think it's important, but we need other approaches too. Noor has a big fat question. AI is
I love it.
promising a lot in personalized education. If it comes through, then what's the structure and future of a brick and mortar university? So, I mean, I think of all the things the university does, we're partially a lifestyle thing, and I think we need to accept that we're a time in people's lives. We provide them with a certain experience, and that's all very true. And then I think we also provide assurance of learning and a signal to the world of what someone's capable of. So that is the assessment piece. That is what we've been discussing today. We, as a community of scholars, set standards and decide what it is, what graduatedness looks like, what it is to be of the required standard. And then we judge whether people have made that. And I don't think that's something that's going to be taken away from the academy. So I think that's probably what we end up with. But perhaps a lot of the more routine teaching and learning things do end up with AI. Evie says, what are your thoughts on our regulation? Oh no, this one has been addressed. Yeah, our regulation copyright. Hoda says Australia's regulating social media for youth, which may help in that area. Yeah, so we are going to have laws that prohibit people, I believe it's under 16, from using social media at all. So I have a 12-year-old son who's very upset about this. He will not be able to have a Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, anything like that. Again, I don't think they're going to be very effective. I think it's a useful signal. It's a very useful tool for me as a parent because I can say, no, you can't do that. It's against the law. And we can have very useful conversations in our household. But I'm sure if my son is sufficiently motivated, he will find a way to get around it.
Phil, I guess these regulations are there because I have a 13-year-old, but it shows like since ever, those regulations, be it for Insta, if you read the rules, they're not allowed to have them. So eventually, they set the codes for using social media for kids. For instance, my kids are not using it at all because it's like not appropriate for their age. So eventually, regulations are there, but it's us parents who need to basically set the rule at home.
Absolutely. And I think this is sort of the signaling power of regulation and legislation, that it does have a benefit in communicating societal standards. So this helps me as a parent. The legislation prohibiting cheating helps in certain conversations because it frames cheating as an illegal act. Regulation around AI says you're not allowed to make a deep fake of somebody else. Doesn't stop you from doing it, but it communicates a signal and sort of shared values.